Previously, on Radiance and Corruption, we were introduced to our heroes, Assad, Ronald, and Rashak. The three of them were all tasked by a mysterious benefactor to retrieve a stolen object from the home of Duke Tyfir. Arriving at their destination, they found themselves at a party full of the Duke's most hated rivals. It was at this party that the Duke revealed his aims, to rid the continent of Havion from King Beldar. In attempting to finish off all his enemies at once, Duke Tyfir attacked with command over the elements. Together with the king's general and a lady from the desert, Assad, Ronald, and Rashak managed to send Duke Tyfir and his guards running. But our heroes now face another problem. They now need to escape the burning mansion. Escape from Tyfir Manor. Assad breathed a sigh of relief as he stepped into the cold room. It was a shocking contrast to the fiery inferno that he had just walked out of.
"I haven't seen a tussle like that in years,"
laughed Sir Ronald. His rusty old armor clinked as he did so.
"We have no time to reminisce," said King's General Tabert. "We need to find a way out."
The room appeared to be the Duke's personal living chambers. It boasted not of wealth, but of knowledge. The room was a semicircle in shape. The walls were plain, and the room had an air of neatness. Several objects of interest caught Assad's attention. Standing on the periphery of his vision, right next to the doors, were two fine suits of armor, as if they were standing guard. Assad was relieved to find that there were no occupants within the armor. He and his companions were already heavily injured. The room also had a square-shaped four-poster bed that sat at an angle on the floor. Off to the side of the bed, a rectangular rug dominated the center of the room. The rug was made of fine fabric, but unlike the other rug Assad saw in the house, this rug was much plainer. A desk stood directly opposite from the door, just underneath a beautiful stained-glass window. Through the window, Assad could see the dark shapes of trees in the forests to the north.
"Perfect! We can just smash our way through the window,"
Ronald said. He started towards the window, brandishing his sword. "Stop!" Rashak said. The minstrel was clearly very interested in this room. "Remember that we need to find that stolen property?"
Yes, of course," said Ronald. "We should probably start looking first."
"Stolen property," Tabert said. "I wouldn't put it past Duke Tyfir. We should investigate this room. Maybe we can also find some information about what Tyfir's plan is." "But what about the fire?" Lady Ishta asked.
"Milady, when the time comes, we can just break out of the window at our leisure," Assad said. "I'm quite fond of the stained glass, however. I should like to look at it a moment longer before we destroy it."
The design of the glass depicted several angelic beings standing in front of a radiant sun. They pointed swords below them, toward a dark earth. The swords cast beams below them, illuminating parts of the earth with their rays. Written along the outside edge of the window, in bright white glass, was a poem. "First where iron leads, stoic, true. Then where wings flutter to, when frost comes anew. Third, from whence comes the wind of death. Lastly, where the sun takes its last breath." Lady Ishta was standing next to Assad, musing over the window as well. "What do you make of it?" she asked.
"I've never seen anything like it," Assad said. "Few of our people have glass windows, let alone one such as elegant. I am, however, perplexed by this, how do you say, limerick?"
"You mean poem?" Lady Ishta suggested.
No, that is not the word. Perhaps riddle?
"Yes, it is a riddle," Assad stated.
"Rashak, what do you make of... what are you reading?"
Rashak was holding a book with a worn cover. The title said, "The Founding and History of Havion." "Just a history book."
"Why would you be reading a history book at a time like this?"
Assad said incredulously. Already some mists of smoke were leaking through the door. "So says the man who's trying to solve a riddle. Anyways, you never know what value knowledge can have." This book talks about how people came to our continent, most of them traveling from a place called Fenrir. They landed in the northern city of Kaldil. North, thought Assad. He looked at the window. First where iron leads, stoic, true. Assad reached into his pocket and pulled out his compass. He had traveled many miles with this prized possession of his. It had guided him from city to city. Inside was a rod of iron, which always pointed north. Assad looked at his compass. It pointed toward the window. Glancing around the room once more, something caught Assad's eye. The four-poster bed in the room. It had a rope dangling from each corner. These ropes would normally be used for closing curtains around the bed. The interesting thing was, there were no curtains. Assad walked across the room, stopping near the north corner of the bed. First where iron leads, stoic, true. He grabbed the rope at the corner and tentatively pulled it. Assad smiled in satisfaction. What was next? Then where wings flutter to, when frost comes anew. Birds. They fly south when it gets cold. Assad ran to the opposite corner of the bed, where he pulled another rope. Third, from whence comes the wind of death. Assad knew of a story about such a wind. Famine came to a land when an easterly wind destroyed the crops of the field. Assad pulled the rope to the east of the bed. Lastly, where the sun takes its last breath. This was the easiest of the lines. Earlier this evening, the sun had set on the western horizon, as it did every night. Assad pulled the final rope, and a loud clunk sounded in the middle of the room. The center of the rug in the room lifted. With Lady Ishta's help, Assad rolled the large rug over to reveal a trap door leading into darkness. There was no ladder, but straight metal walls going downward. Ronald, Rashak, and Tyfir wandered over, looks of confusion on their faces.
Well, friends, Assad said, it appears our friend Duke Tyfir likes hiding secrets in rugs.
Rashak. Air rushed around Rashak as he slid down the metal chute. He had to keep a hand on his feathered hat to keep himself from losing it on the way down. It seemed this chute was leading deep underground. Eventually light came from below, and the chute started to get less steep. Rashak reached the light and fell in a heap on the cold stone floor of a room. The room around him glittered and shone. The torchlight from the walls reflected and was magnified by mountains of gold and jewels. Rashak looked in awe. He had never seen such a vast amount of wealth. Rashak was so amazed that he almost missed the sound of something sliding down from the chute above. He snapped out of his trance, but not soon enough. Assad came down from above, slamming into Rashak and knocking both of them to the ground. "You couldn't have yelled down to warn me you were coming down?" Rashak snapped.
You couldn't have just stepped out of the way? Assad retorted. The others should be.
His words trailed off. Assad's eyes widened as he saw the heaps of gold and sparkling gems that were lining the room. A clanging came from above as metal crashed into metal. Assad and Rashak looked at each other, realization dawning in their eyes. They both made to dart out of the way, but Rashak's boot caught on Assad's laces. The two of them landed flat on the stone floor. A crunch sounded as a heavy metal mass landed on Assad and Rashak. Rashak winced in pain.
Nice, easy, soft landing,
Ronald said triumphantly. He looked downward at Assad and Rashak, who were squirming underneath him.
What are you lot doing down there?
Just softening your fall, my lord.
Assad stood up and brushed himself off, clearly annoyed. Rashak stood up as well. He was obviously never going to get a break with these two around. We better move out of the way before another incident. The three stepped to the side as Lady Ishta came down next. King's General Tyfir was soon to follow. "What is this place?" Lady Ishta asked.
Possibly Duke Tyfir's personal vault, Tabert speculated. I didn't know such a large amount of riches existed in all Havion. But why would he leave it all here and burn down his house? Assad asked. The others continued their discussion, but Rashak turned his attention back to the room. The riches were confined only to the edges of the room. There was a stone door set into one wall. In the center of the room stood a massive set of brass scales. The 2 plates were about the size of wagon wheels, each. One plate was full of gold. It laid low to the ground. The other plate was empty and sat higher in the air. An inscription was etched into the top of the gilded scale. Give me a treasure of value untold, that I may equate to a measure of gold. It's another riddle, Rashak muttered. The door sealed shut. Lady Ishta was pushing at the great stone slab. Well, we need to get out of here soon. Assad was rubbing his leg, where Ronald had landed earlier. He was seething. Don't you see? Rashak started. We solved the riddle of the scales, then the door will lead to the next room. Well, what do you think the answer is? Assad snapped. Rashak's mind began to race. There were some particularly large treasures in the piles. Specifically, there was a massive ruby, a large sapphire, and a big emerald. There were silver chalices and golden chunks. Then Rashak looked down. He was still holding the book, The Founding and History of Havion, from the Duke's library upstairs. An idea struck him. Knowledge is valuable. He walked over to the scale and set the book down on the empty plate. Nothing happened. The scale didn't shift the slightest. Assad gave him a confused look. Rashak shrugged. It was worth a try. He then walked over to examine the big red ruby in the corner of the room. Maybe one of the gems was the key. Are you serious? Assad said. You thought this foolish book from upstairs was the solution to this riddle? That is the most ridiculous. Rashak ignored him. Something seemed strange about the ruby. Rashak had seen small rubies before, and this didn't shine as bright, or reflect light the same way. Was it a forgery? Even the gold seemed artificial. Then Rashak saw it. There was a subtle seam on the floor, right where the gold pile started. Now that he noticed it, the floor appeared to have these seams all along the border between the empty floor and piles of riches. It was a trap. Well, I think you should have your foolish book back. Rashak turned to see Assad wind up his arm, book in hand. Stop! Rashak exclaimed. But it was too late. The book left Assad's hand and sailed across the room. The throw went far off target, just out of reach of Rashak. The book crashed into a stack of gold coins, sending them scattering everywhere. Suddenly a rumbling shook the room. A small, dense object struck Rashak painfully on top of his head. Rashak looked up to see a trickle of gold coins falling from the ceiling. Rashak threw his arms above his head as dozens more coins struck him from above. The trickle evolved into a cascade, then a deluge. The floor was piling high. The coins were now up to Rashak's ankles and rising rapidly. Over here! Lady Ishta yelled. In the center of the room near the scales was the only place of refuge. No coins fell there. Rashak slowly waded through the increasing mountains of gold. Each coin that struck him was answered with a sting of pain. Agony ran through Rashak's entire body. He had to clamber onto the piles to avoid drowning in coins. He managed to get atop the pile when his feet came out from under him. He was now crawling on top of the massive pile of coins, his hands and feet sinking deep. Hundreds more coins thundered onto his body, stinging and bruising him. Rashak's vision started to darken. The pain was overwhelming. His arms slipped on the pile, his face crashed into the gold below, and everything went dark. Assad had no idea such a trap was set. The moment Rashak went down, Assad started scrambling toward him. The coins rained down on Assad, but he was determined to remedy the situation. Assad grit his teeth. Rashak was slowly being buried underneath the monsoon of metal.
Finally, Assad reached him. He hoisted Rashak out of the goal and started to roll Rashak's body over the mountains of riches. Assad shielded Rashak's body as best as he could. Breathing heavily, Assad finally reached the refuge at the center of the room. He laid Rashak's unmoving body next to the scales. Lady Ishta immediately began to check Rashak's vital signs. He was breathing weakly. Glaring at Assad, Lady Ishta slipped a bottle out of a pouch at her side. The bottle was full of a murky brown liquid. She unstopped it and poured the liquid down Rashak's throat. Rashak began to cough and sputter. His eyelids flew open and his groggy eyes settled angrily on Assad.
My apologies, dear Rashak.
Rashak shook his head and began to sit up. Lady Ishta gently helped him. The gold coins were just trickling down at this point. Eventually the cascade stopped and something strange happened. A ringing noise permeated the air, and the gold coins began to fly back upward. Assad and the others had to plug their ears because of the loud metallic clinking that occurred as millions of coins clattered in the air. This continued for a few minutes, until the room was neat and tidy, as it had been when they just entered the room. The few gold piles and jewels around the rim of the room remained, now appearing less tantalizing. "Pressure plates," Rashak said. "I suggest we don't touch anything in this room." He glowered at Assad.
You should have seen the Bardathol wealth back in the day, Ronald started. We were high nobility, esteemed by all.
He gazed off into an imaginary distance.
What happened, my liege? Assad asked.
What do you mean, what happened? Ronald snapped. Ah, yes, the wealth. Well, that doesn't matter. My high birth is all that matters. I would not trade my station for all the wealth you could offer me.
Hold on, Rashak said. He looked at the gilded scale before the company. Give me a treasure of value untold, that I may equate to a measure of gold, he read. Sir Ronald, come here.
You dare command one of my rank? Ronald said, offended.
Assad was intrigued by Rashak's request.
My liege.
Ronald turned to Assad. Can't you see he's injured? Who better to help him with what he needs than the most noble and capable of us all? Rashak rolled his eyes.
Must I do everything around here?
Ronald said, exasperated.
But I take your point. It is within the Knight's code to help those in need.
He walked over to Rashak.
What aid do you require?
I need you to sit down on this empty scale, Rashak stated.
What is the meaning of this?
This scale says to give it something of value untold. You yourself said that you are of great nobility. Surely you can't just try and sit upon this? Rashak inquired. Behind Ronald, General Tabbert was suppressing a laugh.
I don't think it will be quite comfortable, but I suppose I could use a rest,
Ronald said. He attempted to clamber onto the scale, but the plate was a little higher than he could step onto. Tabbert stepped forward, and together he and Rashak boosted Ronald onto the plate. Ronald protested vocally, but cooperated in the end. As his weight shifted onto the scale, the two plates moved to an even level, gold in one and Ronald in the other. The noise of stone grating on stone met the ears of the company. The stone door in the wall slowly slid to the side, revealing an opening to another passageway. Ronald was laying back in the brass scale plate, relaxed.
For once, I was mistaken,
Ronald said.
This is quite comfortable.
Rashak. The stone corridor stretched out before Rashak and his companions. Torches simmered in braziers, casting light throughout the hallway. Eventually, the hallway forked in a V shape. From the fork, Rashak could see a door at the end of each hallway. Each door had a single word above it. Above the left door was written, Power. The right door had the word, Knowledge. I feel a draft coming through, Tabbert said. Indeed, there was a slight flow of air from down the corridor. It's strongest down the left path. Indeed, the right path had almost no breeze. That must mean the exit is this way, Lady Ishta said. I'll lead the way. Assad stepped to the front of the group. The rest of you go ahead, Rashak said. I'm curious what the Duke has in this other room. Are you sure? Lady Ishta said. You are still quite injured. Rashak looked at the bandages on his arms. I'm sure the worst is behind me. I'll be careful. Rashak made his way down the right branch of the hallway, his steps echoing in the air. He tentatively reached his hand forward to grab the brass handle of the oak door. He pulled, and the door swung without a sound. The room inside was dark, but something shone in the center. Rashak could barely see much in the room. He propped open the door, letting some of the hallway's torchlight illuminate the space. The room appeared to be blank all around him. It was a circular chamber, with the same stone walls from the hallway. The floor rose upward to a circular dais. Rashak stepped onto the dais carefully. Nothing happened. A small pedestal stood in the center. Atop it was the source of the unnatural light. It was glowing midnight blue. It appeared to be a fist-sized jewel inset into the pedestal. It had small white winking lights on its surface. Almost in a trance, eyes wide open, Rashak reached a finger toward the object. When his finger made contact with the cold jewel, the light expanded, and Rashak was enveloped in it. The white speckles from the jewel flew out from it. Rashak was surrounded by what appeared to be the night sky. The white lights were stars around him, exuding radiance and brightness. He viewed all of this around as if he were a towering titan. Clouds of gas floated around the room in different spots, showing brilliant purple and orange, among other colors. Eventually, the scene seemed to move into one particular object. It was a large rock, floating through the air. It hovered aimlessly, with no direction. Out of the corner of his eye, Rashak saw a red light approaching. It was a fiery comet, careening toward the rock, its tail burning with brilliant red light. The comet struck the rock hard, sending it spinning. The flames of the comet engulfed the rock entirely. The rock continued floating through space, where it reached one of the gas clouds. As the rock passed into the cloud, steam started to erupt off its surface. When the rock emerged from the cloud, a layer of vapor still surrounded the sphere. The sphere shook erratically, spinning and moving even faster. The sphere continued to sail through the air, when suddenly the vapor around it began to clear quickly. This incoming force was unseeable, but it cleared the vapor on the surface of the sphere and slowed its spin. Rashak could see the rock again, except its features were now covered by blue oceans. A thick blackness started to creep over the sphere at this moment. It engulfed the entire globe, obscuring its features. This world was void of all light, until a great light came into view across the room. The rock drifted to it, eventually being pulled into its bright embrace. The darkness dissipated from the light's presence, collecting where the light could not find it. The side facing away from the light was always covered in this black mist. It shifted as the rock spun. Here and there on the light's surface, small bits of blackness could be seen. After the rock spun around the light a few times, everything started to shrink once again. The winking lights congregated together as the cosmic scene zoomed outward. It seemed to be converging back to the midnight glowing jewel. Stars passed through Rashak's body, and everything collapsed into the jewel. The room was left as still as it was before. Rashak was intrigued and mystified. He had never seen anything like this before. Assad. Why are you hurrying? General Tabert asked. I just want to make sure it's safe before anyone comes in, Assad responded. The truth was, if what he was looking for was in this room, he didn't want anyone else to find it first. Assad wrenched open the door labeled Power. This was a circular room, full of wooden racks lining the walls. Most of the racks were empty. Some had broken scraps of metal or papers. Assad did not pay any caution whatsoever to his circumstances, He fumbled through the scraps and found a little of interest. He did find a dagger sheath. Maybe this would fetch some coin. Then something caught his eye. On a table at the far end of the room was a familiar object. It was a nondescript brown drawstring bag with 2 blue beads at the ends of the strings. This was it! This was the package they were sent to obtain. Assad almost slipped on some stray papers as he ran to the table. His fingers fumbled on the strings of the bag as he began to open it. Assad hesitated for a second. At this moment, some words echoed in his memory. The words were said by a raggedly dressed young man. The benefactor gave strict instructions for us to return the bag to him without looking at the contents. But what could be so important that he could not see it? Why would they have been given this instruction? Was it dangerous? Was it a secret? Surely nobody would know if Assad took a look. With conviction, Assad pulled the knot apart and slowly opened the bag. That very moment, flames licked upwards at him. He almost jumped in surprise, but his hands gripped the sides of the bag harder. What was this?
Are you okay over there, Assad?
The voice of Tabert from behind startled Assad. He hastily tied the bag closed and slipped it into his pocket. Turning around, Assad said,
Yes, nothing to worry about. No traps or anything. It seems that Duke Tyfir made off with everything that was here.
That's a shame, Tabert said. I was hoping to find some proof of Tyfir's plans. Rashak eventually returned, and the group continued through another corridor that led to a gear-operated elevator. They stood on the stone platform, and chains carried them up to an opening where moonlight cascaded through. When they emerged from the opening, they found themselves in a gazebo amid some beautiful gardens. Ashes lay about the area. In the distance, a smoldering structure sat, abandoned.
It seems Tyfir's goons are gone, Tabert said. I suggest we camp out here for the night. I'll take first watch. Rashak and I will grab some firewood, Assad said.
Rashak looked quizzically at Assad.
That's a fair idea. Don't be too long, Tabert said.
As Rashak and Assad walked into the night, Rashak turned to Assad. Tell me, what's the matter? Assad paused before responding.
It's better that I show you.
And that's chapter 3, everybody. Where will our adventurers go after this? What is this artifact? Who is the benefactor? And is this really his personal property? Find out in future installments of Radiance and Corruption. If you want to hear about another band of adventurers in the land of Havion, I recommend you listen to chapter 1 of Radiance and Corruption. Our next chapter will continue their story. Please hit the like button if you liked this, and subscribe for more of this story and others. Thanks for listening.